Okay, welcome to part 2 of this video. We're talking about mind mapping. My name is Anne Apps. I'm an academic at the University of Newcastle Law School, and I'm here in a Zoom room with two of my law students, Olivia Shedden and Emily Mursa. And we've prepared another short video about a recent assessment task that we did, which was on mind mapping. And this is a part of this series on it's really around creative assessment and doing assessment a little bit differently. So we used a mind mapping technique to solve a legal problem. And in this part of the video, I just wanted to have a quick chat with Olivia and Emily about the task and what they enjoyed about it and what they didn't enjoy about it, but also a little bit about legal problem solving and how their skills have developed certainly over this semester, and what are the sorts of things that have help them progress their problem-solving skills. So I'm going to start by asking Olivia to tell us what she enjoyed. What did she enjoy about doing the mind mapping task as a technique for solving legal problems?
Yes, sure. So being a mind mapping task, of course, it's a little bit different than just answering a problem question. So that variety was enjoyable in terms of formatting. In particular, I really liked being able to discuss both sides of the argument, so including counter arguments and then anticipating how I could argue against those counter arguments. So that's something that we don't really get much of an opportunity to do in IRAC problem questions. So that was probably what I enjoyed the most.
How about you, Emily? What did you think?
Yeah, similar to what Olivia said, I think I liked that we could consider alternate arguments and really kind of explore them. But I also liked that because we didn't have a whole lot of words and space, you had to be really concise. And so you had to kind of get to the crux of what was worth arguing and what was worth putting time into. And I liked that I was kind of forced to do that and straight away be like, yeah, okay, this is an issue, but it's not worth our time, and here's why. Whereas in like a traditional IRAC problem, probably would have spent 300, 400 words getting to the same conclusion. So being forced to kind of do that straight away was difficult, but really good, I think.
That's terrific. I'm probably going to just say this for the audience who are listening. So because we've made 2 videos and I've really done the introduction in this video, this is probably better to watch first, and then you'll understand what Emily and Olivia are talking about when you look at the second video, which shows the mind mapping and explains a little bit about how they did the mind mapping. So I might just clarify that when these videos are put up, that we'll use this one as part 1. Okay, so we know that you liked the task because the mind map forced you to be sort of super concise and you had to peel away a lot of words. And from a marking perspective, we love that because we didn't have to find your answer, didn't have to dig so hard to find exactly where you're actually answering, addressing the issues and so on. So I want to know what you didn't like about the task. So I'm going to start with Emily, but if you don't, you can flick to Olivia if you want to. But yeah, so what was there any aspect of the task that you didn't enjoy?
I think my gut reaction when we first had it was I was a bit put off by the whole mind map format because obviously you're uncomfortable with the way that, even just the way it works, trying to work out how to use it. And then, I think that being concise was really, really difficult. So that was kind of a bit I learnt a lot from it, but it was quite tricky.
Yeah. Would you say that, because this was something that I was going to put into my design video, was to talk about how I set the task up, and we did use mind mapping in class for a few weeks before you did the task. Did that help?
Yeah, 100%, because you actually knew how to use it and how to actually kind of make the arrows and colors and different things, and you saw what worked and what didn't. So yeah, it was helpful.
Okay. So Olivia, what did you not like about the task?
I think Emily sort of touched on it. It was having to be so concise to fit everything into the mind map. But I think that was actually, there was merit in that because it forced me to sort of get rid of things that weren't as relevant and to really focus in on, okay, what sub-issues are going to be critical in this case, rather than, just elaborating on and on.
So we've had a little bit of a preliminary chat about this, and that was about one of my objectives with this task was to try and take you beyond the IRAC approach. So do you think that I succeeded in doing that with you? Because that was sort of my end goal, was to move you beyond that sort of very one-sided sort of approach to problem solving. So what did you think? Did it work?
I think it certainly did work. Like I've mentioned, just having the opportunity to raise the counter arguments, which is something that the IRAC method is quite, I guess, it's a bit narrow compared to that. So there's not a lot of room in those sort of traditional problem questions to consider the other side and to really show like your full knowledge of the law and how it can be applied to both sides. So I think that this task was really beneficial in that we were able to show our full knowledge. And I think that that's something that's going to be helpful for practice, understanding the other side and where they're coming from as well.
Okay, fantastic. Emily?
Yeah, I think this, the mind map method, it was good because it kind of integrated that issue, rule, application, conclusion, like it was part of each step of your mind map. And so instead of kind of having these really clear-cut, neat statements, which is great, but like the reality of it is that often you are dealing with, you're trying to solve the problem, you know, as each issue is addressed. And so being able to kind of do that at each step, I found really helpful. And yeah, it was kind of different to the IRAC approach, which I liked.
You've sort of nailed it there, because it's true. And you've just reminded me that something that sometimes I tell law students is that IRAC is not something that divides into issue, then rule, then apply, then conclude. It's actually every paragraph is an IRAC, or every issue you deal with as an IRAC. Here is the sub-issue, here is the rule, and here is how you have applied it and reached a conclusion. And I guess that's what you were doing, all in those tiny little bubbles. So yeah, that's exactly right. So you've got that. So what did you do? How did you go about identifying sub-issues? It doesn't matter. Either of you can answer this one.
I will go. So our problem question focused on privity and estoppel. And for estoppel, it was really, for me, it was, okay, what are the different, for privity rather, it was what are the different avenues that might be argued here, and then sort of like making it quite clear that those different avenues are the sub-issues, so joint promisees or agency, for example. And then for estoppel, it was each element, whether it's reliance or detriment, going through each of those is a sub-issue.
So obviously, and Emily, you can jump in on this one, but it's related, but obviously what both of you did, because a lot of people do that and actually give me all the elements back, but did this process of working out argument, counter argument, for example, did you drop out any of those elements or issues or alternative approaches? Did you drop any of them out because you decided that they weren't relevant, or what did you do? I think Emily, you talked about this earlier.
Yeah, I think sometimes, obviously in every set of facts, there's probably going to be like areas of weakness or areas where it's that like nitty gritty, there's something to talk about. And then there's other elements that it's just like, yeah, okay, on these facts, that's there. And so obviously you need to say that you know that that's an element and it's met, but that's probably as far as you need to go. And don't waste time and words and energy putting in these like long explanations. So for example, I think in our estoppel question, in terms of identifying the relevant promise, I don't think that was particularly like contentious. It was pretty clear what the promise was. It was in an email, blah, blah, blah. So I could have spent like, ages explaining that, but it was just like, okay, it's better to look at maybe, reliance where maybe there is some contention, or unconscionability where there's some contention. So that type of thing.
Yeah, it's exactly right, because I think the getting to maybe approach that I've sort of touched on here is that you actually focus in on where there is tension. So where you know that there is a good counter argument, that you know that's where you're going to be spending your time arguing in front of that judge in court, and the judge is going to have to make a decision, and that might win or lose you the case. So you won't have the energy to put all the time and effort into every single element when there's one element that the other side has got an argument that's, you know, potentially a good argument, and you know that this is where the tension is. So you've worked out where it is that you've got to zone your attention. So I think that's, you know, that's the thing that I was talking about that mind maps do, that sort of reveals that there's a different approach to just a straight IRAC approach, that you've got to start working out where are the weaknesses, like where's the weakness in my case and where's the weakness in their case, because that's where the tensions are. And that's where cases are going to be won or lost. And if it goes on appeal, you know that often those cases only go to appeal on one issue, you know, one thing. So that's about sort of finding those weak spots. Okay. The other thing that that just quickly we're going to touch on is case reading, because, you know, at Newcastle Law School, we put a lot of emphasis on case reading, and students don't love it. Reading cases takes a lot of time. And in this particular problem question, assessment question, I really threw it at you because I gave you, I think, I don't know, 8 or 9 cases that you had to choose from. You had to work out which cases were going to be useful for you and how were you going to use them in an argument, which meant that you had to use cases, firstly, that weren't cases that you would find in a textbook. Most of them, a couple might pop up in a textbook, but most of them were quite recent cases, and they weren't necessarily reported judgments. Some of them were lower court cases and so on. But I was really pushing you here in terms of case reading. So I'm interested in knowing what tips you would give students about reading cases, because it is a burden that we put on you.
I think the first thing I would say is like to have a good knowledge of what you're looking for and a background knowledge of an understanding of the law, because it can be really difficult when you just open a case to kind of be knowing what you're looking for. And so if you have a good understanding, you know, if you've kind of like paid attention in class and done pre-stuff and that type of thing, by the time that you're getting to an assessment and you are asked to research cases, you know what you're looking for, and that way you don't spend ages reading a case. You know, for example, like in some of the cases I think you said us, there was a lot of issues that were like completely outside of the scope of the assessment, and so reading those pages would have been like a complete waste of time. So just scrolling to like, okay, this is what I need to get into and this is an area that I want to use this case for, saves a lot of time and just kind of helps make your case reading, I think, better.
Absolutely. I regretted my decision to give you so many cases because, of course, the field was covered and I had to get my head around every one of those cases too. So I was repaid for my torture. How about you, Olivia? What tips would you give other students about case reading?
Yeah, I think similar to what Emily said, having the background knowledge from our case readings in class was really helpful, and just sort of having to break it down like little bit by bit sort of, so it doesn't seem too overwhelming, especially sort of, I think one of my additional cases that I chose was split between estoppel and a family provision claim, and that was just not something that we've covered in class. So I sort of thought, okay, so that's a separate claim that they've got going on, but I'm not going to bother with that because it's not going to be relevant to the separate estoppel claim. Yeah. Yeah.
So sort of targeting and using the keyword searches, because all the cases have their keywords. Yeah.
They're a lifesaver, honestly.
Yeah, they are. And I think contemporary judgments often have indexes, which is even better because you can actually scroll through each judgment. And, you know, the New South Wales Supreme Court of Appeal does beautiful indexes now to the judgments. So that's really helpful. Okay, just the last little thing, you know, because for yonks, I've been going on in class about the difference between a rule and a gem and how students often miss the opportunity to reinforce a good argument with what I call a gem in a case. And I was just going to ask both of you how you use gems and what are they and how are they different from rules?
think like for me, a rule is often, it might be something that they've reiterated, especially in a lower judgment from a higher court judgment. And that might just be like a really simple black and white statement of how to get from A to B, or what a particular, like the elements of a particular thing or whatever. And for me, a gem might be maybe a little later on in the judgment when a judge is really placing emphasis on something that really needs to be focused on when you're using that rule. So it's kind of like a rule for applying the rule. And I find that really helpful, because if a judge has said that, yeah, we should put particular emphasis or be really concerned when we're dealing with cases like this on how we apply the rule, then you can kind of use that if your facts are similar. And so, yeah, I think for me, it's more about the way that they apply the rule than the rule itself, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's actually their signpost, isn't it? As you just said, it's a bit of a signpost that the judge gives that says, this is really important. Like, I think this is really important, so I'm going to tell you why I think it's really important, and I'm going to give you an explanation as to why it's really important. So I think that's great. Yeah. Olivia, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with what Emily mentioned. I think that the gems are usually, I guess, less formal language. So they might be like a bit more imaginative, or they might use metaphors, or they might give examples of sort of like real world situations. So that's always like, when I read the judgment and I see things like that, I think, okay, this is going to be a gem and it's going to help me to apply the rule. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, sometimes I say they're like quotable quotes, and the judges, sometimes it's really obvious that they're really hoping that some very smart law student's going to pick that up and quote it, and it'll stick with them. So when they go to the bar, they're going to cite that judge and that part of their judgment in their argument. So, yeah, that's terrific. Thank you both so much for your time. It's been great talking to you both. I've really enjoyed our session today, and hopefully other students will find it useful. So for other students who are watching this and wondering now what the heck was this mind mapping assessment all about, there'll be the second video that you can watch where Olivia and Emily explain a little bit about how they did their mind maps. And we haven't talked about the software, which was Padlet, but the reason we used Padlet was because we had institutional accounts. So that was really helpful to me. So I was able to use it in class in the lead up to the assessment task, so everyone could become familiar with the tool. But there are lots of other mind mapping software tools out there, and many of them have, free trials and so on. So you can play around with it. Not everybody loved the mind mapping, but some students loved it. Some students are like, oh, I use mind maps all the time now. They're my thing. But I was not somebody that was a great mind mapper, so I could really sympathize with students who were saying, oh, I would prefer just to write out my response and then craft it into a mind map. But I have to say this year particularly, because I was giving all of those demo mind maps for the case readings, so actually I'm getting better at this. So that was I've developed a skill that I didn't know I had as well. So anyway. It's always fun to try something new. But thank you both so much. I'm just going to say goodbye to everyone and turn off the recording. But thanks very much for listening to us today.